It was supposed to be another routine day. Robert West, the CEO of Westtech Innovations, walked into his office, the floor beneath his feet as solid as ever. He had made it. An empire built on hard work and determination. But, as the morning sun crept through the blinds, something felt off. His assistant, Lisa, hurried into his office, holding a file that could be the beginning of the end. "Robert," Lisa said, voice trembling, "you need to see this." As he took the file from her hands, a sinking feeling overtook him. It was a leak. A smear campaign. His competitors had finally found a way to strike. It was all unraveling before his eyes. "Who's behind this?" Robert demanded. Lisa looked down, her face pale. "We don't know yet, but it's bad. The board. They want an emergency meeting." The walls that had once protected him were now closing in. He could feel the weight of the world pressing against him, every decision from here on out a potential misstep. His empire was crumbling. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Robert stood at the head of the table, trying to keep his emotions in check, but the weight of the impending decisions bore down on him. He glanced at each of the board members, their eyes filled with judgment. "I never expected this," Robert said, his voice low but firm. "This company, my company, is built on trust, and now it's slipping through my fingers." The room was silent. He could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Lisa was sitting across from him, her gaze steady, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. One of the board members, Michael, cleared his throat. "Robert, we've always respected you, but this situation is complicated. People are calling for your resignation." Robert's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't lose everything he had worked for. But deep down, he knew that this moment was inevitable. His empire, built on ambition and ruthless decisions, was now crumbling, and he had no one to blame but himself. Robert walked back to his office, his mind reeling. The news from the boardroom weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had always prided himself on his resilience, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that his world was falling apart. When he stepped into his office, the room felt suffocating. His assistant, Lisa, was already there, standing by the window with her arms crossed, staring at the city below. "I'm sorry, Robert," Lisa said quietly, her voice tinged with sympathy. "I never thought it would come to this." Robert turned toward her, his eyes filled with pain. "I didn't either. I thought I had control. I thought I could fix this." He paced around the room, frustration mounting. "But it's too late now, isn't it? Too many people have turned on me." Lisa looked at him, her face softening. "Not everyone has turned. You still have a chance to make it right, but you need to act fast." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. The weight of everything on his shoulders was unbearable. He stared at the ceiling, the familiar hum of the city outside doing nothing to calm his nerves. A sudden knock on the door broke his trance. He didn't have to ask who it was. "Come in, Lisa," he said hoarsely. Lisa entered quietly, holding a folder in her hands. She closed the door softly behind her. "I've been looking into the accounts, Robert. There's more to the leaks than we realized." Robert sat up, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" "It's not just corporate sabotage," Lisa replied, her eyes serious. "There are key players inside the company who have been feeding information to the competition. It's a coordinated attack." Robert's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a financial collapse. This was personal. Someone close to him had betrayed him, and the realization hit harder than anything else. "Who?" he whispered. Robert stared at the file Lisa handed him, his hands shaking. He flipped through the documents, each page revealing more and more betrayals. But the worst was yet to come. "This doesn't make sense," Robert muttered. "Why would they go this far?" Lisa's voice was quiet but firm. "Because you were too focused on building the empire, Robert. You didn't see the cracks in your own foundation." He looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Who did this, Lisa? Who's behind this?" She paused before speaking, her words slow and deliberate. "Your CFO, James. He's been working with the competition for months." Robert's world came crashing down. James, the man he had trusted the most, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin, had been the one to betray him. He couldn't believe it. "This is just the beginning," Lisa continued. "We need to act fast, before James completely takes over." The next morning, Robert stood in front of his office window, staring at the city below, lost in thought. He had always believed in the power of his decisions, but now it felt as though everything he had worked for was slipping away piece by piece. He turned when he heard a knock at the door. It was Lisa again. "Robert, you need to face the board. They're calling an emergency meeting. They want answers," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "I know," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I can't avoid it any longer." He walked towards the door, stopping in front of Lisa. "I'll confront them. I've got no choice. But Lisa, we're in this together. We have to take them down." Lisa nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We will, Robert. Together." The boardroom was a battleground. Robert sat at the head of the table, the eyes of every board member fixed on him. Tension was palpable. He knew that his reputation, his legacy, depended on this meeting. "Robert, we need answers. There's a lot riding on this company," one of the board members, David, said, his tone accusatory. "I'm aware of the gravity of the situation, David," Robert replied, his voice steady, though inside he was seething with frustration. "But I promise you, I will fix this." Another board member, Sarah, spoke up. "Can you really fix it? There's talk of a hostile takeover. Our investors are starting to pull out." Robert's heart raced. He had to act fast, but how? The walls were closing in on him, and he could feel the ground beneath him slipping away. "I'll do whatever it takes," Robert said, locking eyes with Sarah. "You have my word." After the meeting, Robert walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The board had made it clear he had to deliver results, or he would lose everything. Lisa was waiting for him outside, her face lined with concern. "They're not going to make this easy, are they?" she asked. "No," Robert muttered. "They're out for blood." He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "But I won't let them take me down. I'll fight no matter what." Lisa nodded. "We'll do it together, Robert. We'll find a way." But deep inside, Robert knew that time was running out. The pressure was mounting, and soon he would be forced to make decisions he didn't want to make. That night, Robert sat alone in his office, staring at the computer screen. The numbers didn't add up. He knew something was wrong. His financial reports were showing discrepancies, hidden losses he hadn't accounted for. He hit the desk with his fist in frustration. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Lisa again, holding a folder. "Robert, I've been going through the accounts," she said, her voice shaking. "There's more going on than we thought. The numbers don't just lie. They've been tampered with." Robert's heart sank. Who would do this? Lisa shook her head. Someone from the inside. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His own team was turning on him. Robert paced the floor, trying to make sense of the betrayal. Lisa had left the room to gather more information, but he couldn't focus. His mind raced, running through all the people who had access to the accounts. Then it hit him. James, betrayal. He stood still, the weight of the realization crashing over him. His most trusted ally, the man he had worked side by side with for years. James had to be the one behind this. Lisa re-entered the room, and Robert turned to her. "I know who did it," he said, his voice hard. "It's James." Lisa's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Robert nodded. "It all adds up. He's been sabotaging me from the inside." Lisa's expression turned grim. "We have to stop him, before it's too late." The next morning, Robert walked into the office, determined to confront James. He knew this wasn't just about business, it was about survival. His empire was at stake, and he wouldn't let anyone destroy it. He found James in his office, hunched over a desk full of papers. James looked up when Robert entered. "James," Robert began, his voice steady, "we need to talk." James gave him a casual smile. "I know, Robert, but this isn't what you think. Robert's jaw clenched. Don't lie to me, James. I know what you've been doing. James stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. I did what I had to do, he said quietly, his eyes cold. You were too blinded by your own ambition. Robert felt a sting, but he wasn't backing down. You're going to regret this. Robert's mind raced as he left James' office. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. James, the one person he had trusted, had been working against him all along. Lisa was waiting for him in the hallway, her face full of concern. What happened? She asked. James admitted to it, Robert said, his voice tight. He's been undermining me, feeding false reports to the board, and sabotaging the company. Lisa shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe it. He was supposed to be your right-hand man. I thought so too, Robert muttered, running a hand through his hair. But now I see he was only looking out for himself. The weight of the betrayal settled heavily on Robert's shoulders. He was no longer just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his life. Robert didn't sleep that night. He stayed up, staring at his phone, running through possible solutions. He couldn't afford to be reckless. If he was going to take James down, he needed to be strategic. The next day he called an emergency meeting with the board. He wasn't going to let James win without a fight. Lisa joined him in the conference room, the air thick with tension. David, one of the board members, looked at Robert with suspicion. We need to talk about your recent actions, Robert. The company's in turmoil. I know, Robert said, standing tall. But I have the truth now. James has been sabotaging us from within. I can prove it. The board's expressions were a mix of disbelief and uncertainty. Robert could feel the walls closing in, but he wasn't backing down. The meeting dragged on for hours. Robert presented every shred of evidence he had gathered, exposing James' lies and manipulation. But the board members weren't convinced. I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Robert Sarah. Another board member said. Your personal involvement in this matter compromises your ability to lead. That's not fair. Robert snapped. I've done everything for this company. I built it from the ground up. I won't let one person tear it all down. David leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Robert? Robert's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. I'm suggesting that we remove James from the equation and take back control. I'm still the CEO, and I'll fight for this company with everything I have. The boardroom meeting ended in a stalemate. Robert had made his case, but the board members were divided. Some believed in him, while others were swayed by James' charisma and manipulation. Lisa walked with him down the hallway, her face filled with concern. They didn't believe you, Robert. They will, he said, his voice full of conviction. I'll make them believe. I have to. Later that night, Robert sat in his office, staring at the city lights outside his window. He had lost so much already, but he wasn't ready to give up. He picked up his phone and made the call. He needed someone from the outside to help. Someone who could take James down for good. The call was made. Robert had contacted a powerful external consultant, Catherine, a no-nonsense corporate strategist known for taking down enemies with ruthless precision. She arrived at his office the following morning, her presence commanding. Robert, she said, looking him over. You've put yourself in a very tight spot, but you called the right person. Let's figure out how to turn this around. Robert took a deep breath, his anxiety briefly giving way to hope. I'm counting on you. Catherine's eyes flickered with a cold, calculating gleam. Then, let's get started. With her expertise, Robert knew he had one final shot to save everything he had built. He couldn't afford to fail. Catherine dove into the company's financials, scrutinizing every detail. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Robert's world had to be deconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up. It's worse than I thought, Catherine muttered after hours of reviewing documents. James has been siphoning funds, leaving behind a trail of manipulation. But you have leverage. Robert leaned forward, eager for any solution. Leverage? What kind of leverage? Catherine smirked, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. You have something he doesn't expect. Your board member connections. We can leverage those to isolate him. Robert's heart raced. This was it. The moment he could take control back. The plan was set in motion. Catherine and Robert reached out to key members of the board, planting seeds of doubt about James' credibility. It was a delicate game, and they had to play it carefully. Later that week, Robert sat in a tense meeting with his most trusted allies on the board. "It's time to act," Robert said, his voice steady but urgent. "James has crossed the line, and if we don't stop him, he'll destroy everything we've worked for." One of the board members, Lisa, nodded. "You were right. It's time we take control of this company again." The decision was made. James would be removed, but the road ahead was full of peril. Robert's reputation was on the line. If this failed, he would lose everything. The day of reckoning arrived. Robert and Catherine had gathered enough support from the board, but they needed to confront James directly. It was now or never. Robert walked into James' office with Catherine by his side. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, sealing them in a room filled with tension. "James," Robert said, his voice low but firm. "It's over." James looked up, surprised, his calm demeanor beginning to crack. "What do you mean, Robert?" Catherine stepped forward. "We've gathered everything. You're done. The board knows what you've been doing." James' face turned pale. He stood up quickly, knocking over his chair. "You can't do this. I'm untouchable." Robert met his gaze with unwavering certainty. "Not anymore." James tried to fight back, but his efforts were in vain. The truth had already been laid bare, and his position had become untenable. Robert felt a wave of satisfaction, but the victory was hollow. As James was escorted out, Robert sat back in his chair, exhausted but relieved. He had won, but at what cost? His empire was in tatters, and rebuilding would take time, and trust he might never regain. Lisa entered the room, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Is it over? For now," Robert said, rubbing his temples. "But the damage is done. The company's been shaken to its core." The silence in the room was heavy, both a sign of victory and a reminder of the scars that would remain. The aftermath of James' ousting had left Robert with little time to savor his victory. Every move he made felt like a step on a tightrope, one wrong turn and everything could come crashing down. Catherine, as always, was quick to remind him of the urgency. "We have to rebuild, Robert," she said, her voice a mixture of command and concern. "You're no longer just the CEO, you're the symbol of this company's survival." Robert leaned back, staring out of his office window. The city below seemed so far away, a reminder of what he was fighting for. "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But every decision now feels like a gamble." Catherine's gaze hardened. "It's not a gamble if you make the right choices." She was right, but Robert couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were yet to come. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and strategic decisions. Robert's focus was laser-sharp, but it didn't stop the creeping anxiety that gnawed at him. One afternoon, Lisa called him into her office. She had a somber look on her face. "Robert," she said, her voice quiet. "I've been hearing rumors. The investors are getting restless. They're not happy with how things are going." Robert's heart sank. "What are they saying?" Lisa hesitated before replying. "They want results. They want stability. If we can't deliver, they might start looking for someone else." The pressure was mounting, and Robert felt like the walls were closing in. "I can't afford to fail," he muttered, more to himself than to Lisa. "We know," she said, her voice unwavering. "But we have to move fast. We need something that will convince them we're still in control." The idea to restructure the company came quickly, but its execution would require precision. Robert and his team had to act fast to reassure the investors, but every decision felt like stepping into unknown territory. Catherine's advice was clear. "We need to make bold moves. This is a time for disruption." They started with a major shift in the company's branding, aiming to present a new image that spoke to the future, not the past. We'll overhaul the entire marketing strategy, Robert decided. And I'll personally lead the pitch to our biggest investors. If I can convince them, we'll be fine. The tension in the room was thick. No one was sure if the plan would work, but Robert knew they had no other choice. It was time to take a risk. The meeting with the investors was tense. Robert stood at the front of the room, presenting his vision for the company's future. His voice was steady, but inside he was shaking. "We've weathered the storm, but we need to move forward," he said, making eye contact with each investor. "This new direction will guarantee growth and stability, but it requires trust, your trust." One of the investors, a man with graying hair and a skeptical expression, raised an eyebrow. "And what guarantees do we have, Robert? You've lost a lot of confidence." Robert swallowed hard, but stood his ground. "I'm asking for a second chance. I've put everything on the line to turn this company around. I believe in it, and I believe in all of you." The room fell silent. For a moment, it felt like everything hung in the balance. Then, one by one, the investors began to nod, signaling their agreement. It wasn't a win yet, but it was progress. The following days brought a sense of tentative relief. The investors were on board, and Robert had secured the company's future, for now. But the battle was far from over. Walking through the office, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He had won the war, but he had lost the trust of so many people along the way. Catherine noticed his silence. "What's going on, Robert?" He looked at her, his eyes tired. "I've been so focused on saving this company that I've neglected the very people who got me here." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You mean the people who betrayed you?" Robert's expression hardened. "No, the people who stuck by me even when things looked impossible." He was beginning to understand. The real challenge was rebuilding the relationships that had been fractured. And that, he realized, was the true cost of ambition. Robert's phone buzzed with another notification. Another scandal. The rumors that had been swirling about the company were now threatening to boil over. His actions were being scrutinized from every angle. Catherine entered the room, her face grim. "We need to talk." "About what?" Robert asked, his voice already heavy with dread. She pulled up a news article on her phone. This. It was a piece about Robert's questionable financial dealings, something from his past that had been brought into the spotlight. "How did this get out?" Robert asked, his pulse quickening. Catherine shrugged. "Someone is leaking it. This isn't just a story. It's a smear campaign." Robert felt the weight of everything he'd worked for slipping through his fingers again. "Who would want to destroy me now?" he muttered. "We need to figure that out," she said. And fast. Robert was getting used to the weight of the world pressing down on him, but this time it felt different. He was no longer fighting for his position alone. He was fighting for his reputation, his legacy. He called a meeting with his most trusted allies, Catherine, Lisa, and the rest of the leadership team. "We're being sabotaged," Robert said, pacing around the room. "And I have no idea who's behind it." Lisa crossed her arms. "Could it be someone on the inside?" "It has to be," Robert said, his voice thick with frustration. "The leaks are too detailed. They know things that only people within the company would know." "We need to act fast," Catherine said. "If we don't, we risk losing everything." Robert turned to face them, his face hardening. "Then let's find out who's doing this, and when we do, we'll make them regret it." As the investigation began, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that someone close to him was betraying him. Every piece of evidence pointed to someone with insider knowledge, someone he trusted. One evening, as Robert was going through the files, he stumbled upon something that made his heart stop. There, hidden in the margins of a report, was a clue. Something that didn't fit. It was a financial transaction between the company and an unknown party. He stared at the name on the paper. "It can't be," Robert muttered to himself. But it was. And the realization sent a chill down his spine. He had been played. The betrayer was closer than he ever imagined. Robert called Lisa into his office, his mind racing with the new information. "We've been betrayed," he said, slamming the paper onto the desk. Lisa's eyes widened as she scanned the document. Are you sure? Robert nodded, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. It's him, Andrew, my own brother. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, taking in the gravity of the revelation. Why would he do this? Robert ran a hand through his hair. Power. Control. He always thought he deserved more. But I never thought he'd go this far. Lisa's gaze softened. What are you going to do? Robert's eyes hardened with resolve. I'm going to confront him, and I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. Robert stormed into his brother's office the next morning, anger radiating off him like a storm. Andrew sat at his desk, his usual smug expression now replaced with a nervous tension. You think you can just destroy everything I've built? Robert spat, his voice seething with fury. Andrew stood, trying to compose himself. It's not what you think. Oh, really? Robert sneered. Then why don't you tell me how it feels to be stabbed in the back by your own flesh and blood? Andrew sighed, avoiding Robert's gaze. You don't understand, Robert. I did it because I had to. You were never going to let me in, never going to give me the power I deserved. Robert's jaw clenched, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife could. You'll pay for this, he promised, his voice low and dangerous. You've ruined everything. Robert sat alone in his office, staring at the view of the city skyline. It was a world he once ruled, but now it felt distant, like a dream slipping away. Catherine entered, a worried look on her face. How are you holding up? Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared ahead, his face hardening with the weight of everything he had lost. Everything is falling apart, he said quietly. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could rebuild. You still can, Catherine replied, her voice gentle but firm. But you need to let go of the past. Robert shook his head. I don't know if I can. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've been fighting alone for too long. It's time to fight for yourself, for what you believe in, not for what you've lost. The next day, Robert called an emergency board meeting. He had no intention of backing down. He would confront the consequences of his actions and fight for his company with everything he had left. As the board members filed into the room, Robert stood, his posture strong. I know I've made mistakes. I've let things go too far, he began, his voice steady. But I'm not done yet. I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to take back control. The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick. Then Lisa, his loyal confidant, spoke up. We're with you, Robert. All the way. Robert's eyes flicked around the room, locking eyes with each board member. Then let's get to work. The time for talking is over. The battle for control had begun. Robert knew that taking back the company wouldn't be easy, but it was the only choice he had. Days turned into weeks and the pressure mounted. Every decision felt like it could make or break him. But Robert pushed forward, driven by a desire to prove that he was more than just the man who lost everything. One evening, as Robert was going through the final details of the company's recovery plan, Catherine walked in with a somber expression. I've heard something, she said, her voice quiet. What? Robert asked, his eyes narrowing. Andrew, she replied. He's planning something bigger, something that could destroy you once and for all. Robert's grip tightened around the papers in front of him. Then we'll stop him before he gets the chance. Robert gathered his most trusted allies, Catherine, Lisa, and the others, and laid out his plan. Andrew wants to take everything from me, but he doesn't know what he's up against. Lisa crossed her arms. You're not alone in this. We're all in. We have the resources, Catherine added. But we need to move quickly. If we give Andrew even a second of breathing room, he'll take full advantage. Robert looked at them all, the weight of their loyalty and trust settling in. Then we'll move first. We'll hit him where it hurts the most. The room was silent for a moment before Robert spoke again, his voice steady but fierce. We fight for what's ours, no compromises. The final confrontation had arrived. Robert faced Andrew in the boardroom, both men standing on opposite sides of the table. There was no room for negotiation. This ends today, Robert said, his voice low but filled with resolve. Andrew sneered, his eyes cold. You're too late. You never stood a chance. Robert didn't flinch. I'm not here to beg for my position. I'm here to take back what's mine. A tense silence hung in the air as the two men faced off. The stakes had never been higher. You should have known better, Andrew said, stepping toward him. I did, Robert replied. And now, I'm going to make sure you regret it.